And thus ends another tale of how a pony received her cutie mark. Ah, what a fascinating headcanon story with that. Anyway, wait a minute. Ah, it's just starting now? Ah, I gave this big speech. I'm not gonna do that again. Anyway, gotta redo the intro with that one, I guess. Hello, my buffalo. pikafan003 here. And today, well, attire. I figured, well, like I said, I'm not gonna redo the speech of how Vinyl got her cutie mark from my headcanon, anyway. Well, not so headcanon, but just head theory. Not even so much head, just theory. But anyway, let's just put this at a reaction, I guess. Because I'm not gonna go through that speech again. Never. Well, so A Somber Year, chapters 26 through 30. Let's get this over with. Chapter 26, Warning, Violence, Gore, Disturbing Content. Oh, we know how this is gonna go, don't we, Vinyl? Anyway, starting out. Celestia and Sombra circled one another slowly, weapons raised and ready to clash with one another, just as they did 1,000 years ago. The blades themselves still held the scratches from that very battle. A smirk was plastered on Sombra's face, while Celestia had a scowl on hers. How long has it been since our last battle? 1,001, perhaps? Sombra mused. Celestia narrowed her eyes in a deadly glare. Murderer, she hissed, her tongue dripping with venom. Now wait. Now what makes you say that, princess? Sombra asked smoothly. You took the lives of 2 innocent ponies that day in the Crystal Empire. You changed the lives of many ponies, including myself. A tear rolled down Celestia's cheek before she snapped her head up to Sombra and glared at him with the utmost hatred toward any pony she's ever known. Twilight Sparkle was more than just a student. She was like the daughter I never had. I loved her like one, and you ripped her away from us. That's a pitiable thing to hear, princess, Sombra yawned. But I didn't come here to listen to your life story. Shall we continue where we left off 1,000 years ago? When my sister arrives, you will regret ever being released from your ice prison, Celestia snapped. Sombra laughed. I'm afraid she won't be joining us this time. She's a little occupied. ... Luna grunted in pain as she skidded back, placing her hoof over the fresh cut on her right arm before snapping her head up to see her attacker. Tears filled in her moderate cyan eyes as she prepared to launch another spell. Please, she begged, don't make me do this, Twilight. I know you're still in there. Twilight merely smirked before she launched another spell at her. Luna quickly dodged the attack and cast her own spell. Still weak as ever, I see, Twilight said. Luna narrowed her eyes and quickly wiped her tears away, although she was still in shock by the fact that her attacker was none other than Twilight Sparkle, the unicorn, now alicorn, that was thought to be dead. Luna's noticed the drastic changes in her appearance and attitude. She wasn't the smart, loving pony she once knew. She wasn't the Twilight who, along with her friends, reverted her back into who she is now. Twilight, Luna breathed as she got up to her hoofs. Oh, Twilight, what did Somber do to you? He opened my eyes, Twilight replied in a straightforward tone before she cast a nightmare spell. Luna let out a horrified gasp as the world around her changed. No, no, she thought frantically. ... You're in for a big surprise, Celestia, Sombra said as he dodged another swing of her halberd before lashing out with his scythe. What kind of surprise? Celestia asked. Or do I even want to know? Sombra flashed a wicked grin, revealing his pure white fangs that weren't common for any pony to have. The dark unicorn laughed before he lashed out his scythe once more. A kind of surprise that will shake you to your core. Celestia growled in frustration before she cast a spell from her horn. Somber immediately turned into his shadow form and allowed the attack to simply go through him as though it were nothing. He then returned to his physical form and cast a spell of his own. A beam of black magic shot from his horn and struck Celestia hard. The white alicorn screamed in surprised pain, but it wasn't enough to even cause her to stumble. She panted softly before glaring up at Sombra. "I demand you tell me, Sombra," she said in a firm tone. Sombra grinned. This was the perfect time to give her a taste of what's to come on later. In a swift movement, he cast a spell upon Celestia. A thinner beam of black magic shot from his horn, and it struck Celestia on her forehead. The alicorn's eyes widened, and she gasped a soft, surprised gasp. ... Back in Ponyville, Applejack and her family were finding it harder to hold off the changelings. "There's too many of them," Applebloom cried as she huddled close to Strongheart. Applejack gritted her teeth in deep thought. They just kept on coming and coming like locusts, and they were starting to get exhausted. She looked over to her big brother and noticed that he was beginning to tire out. She was beginning to assume the worst when she heard a voice scream from the house. "Cousin Applejack!" Babs screamed as she ran out of the house in tears. "Granny Smith is dead! She's covered in blood and—" She stopped when she spotted the changelings surrounding them. All fear and sorrow was quickly replaced with a burning rage and hatred that only Babs could get. "Get away from them, you freaks!" she screamed before she came charging in, letting out a battle cry. Applejack's eyes widened in horror. "Babs, wait!" she cried. But she was quickly taken back when she realized that the filly was having no problem dealing with the changelings. She punched one here, kicked one there. She was using the things she learned on the streets of Manhattan. She had to fight for her life before, so dealing with these changelings felt like nothing. "Get 'em, Babs!" Applebloom cheered on her cousin, pumping her hoof in the air. That's kind of funny. Anyway, Babs beat the changelings to a pulp. The remaining changelings that were left standing backed away from the filly in pure fear as she slowly approached them with a look of murder in her eyes. "So who's next?" she asked. It was enough to scare them away. "And don't let me catch you here again!" she yelled after them. "Babs!" Applebloom happily tackled her cousin in a tight hug. "That was amazing! How did you learn to fight like that?" "Something my big sister taught me back home," Babs replied. "Is every pony all right? I was asleep when I heard Strongheart scream outside. I went downstairs and found Granny Smith on the floor." Her voice trailed off as tears started to swell up in the corners of her eyes once more. The same thing happened to the others as well. "Granny," Applebloom whimpered. As much as she wanted to mourn for their loss, Applejack knew that their work was far from over. She immediately looked at everyone with a firm expression and said, "Something is obviously going on right now. I'm going to head over to Ponyville and help out my friends. You guys stay here and tend to Winona." "No!" Applebloom protested stubbornly. "I'm coming too. I have friends too." "Yeah, the Cutie Mark Crusaders never abandon one another," Babseed added. "If they're going, I'm going," Strongheart said with a defiant look in her eyes. Applejack looked at the trio and sighed heavily before she looked over her shoulder, looked over to her older brother for help. The stallion simply nodded in approval. "Let 'em go, AJ," he said. "I'll stay here and take care of Winona. Their friends need them as much as yours need you." Applejack looked back at the trio and nodded in defeat. "Fine," she groaned, "but try not to get hurt, all right?" "Yes, ma'am," the trio said in unison. ... Sorry, I got an itch. My nose is really itchy. I'm not sick or anything, it's just I got an itchy nose. Celestia stumbled away from Sombra. Her eyes widened in both shock and horror as tears started to roll down her cheeks. "No," she whispered. slowly shaking her head. No, it can't be. That can't be real. And why can't it be real? Somber asked. Because she's dead. You killed her. You... Celestia found herself lost for words. The horrible images of Twilight Sparkle, alive, being tortured mercilessly for hours on end, were now fresh on her mind. The images and screams looked so real that Celestia felt as though she was actually there in person, watching everything happen before her eyes. Somber chuckled darkly as he approached the distraught Alicorn with his weapon raised. She kept on telling me after each session that you and her friends would come to her aid. She cried out your name every night, just begging you would come to her rescue. He then swung his weapon down on her. Celestia immediately responded by swinging her weapon up and stopping his scythe from hitting her. While both weapons were locked, Somber brought his face close to Celestia's and whispered in a soft voice that would have given any pony goosebumps. But you never came. Celestia released a roar of rage and pulled away from Sombra, her eyes narrowed and nostrils flaring with hate and anger. You sick bastard! She yelled. I will rejoice putting you down with my own hooves. Sombra cackled. Now this is something worth fighting for. He jeered before lunging himself at the Alicorn. ... Take that! Pinkie Pie screamed after hitting a changeling across the face with a frying pan. Knowing Pinkie, she would use kitchen utensils as weapons. And that! And some of this! And that! And that! Pinkie Pie! Applejack called from her front door. Pinkie Pie looked over and grinned happily when she saw her friend. AJ! She squealed before hitting another changeling. Don't move, I'm coming in. Like I have a choice. Pinkie Pie frowned, finding herself standing on top of her kitchen counter with a swarm of changelings surrounding her. Applejack frantically looked around for anything that she could use as a weapon. She found a large tree branch lying not far from them. She wasted no time in heading over and snatching it up with her bare teeth. From there, she stormed into Pinkie's home, hitting the changelings away like baseballs. One was hit so hard that they crashed out a window. Nice hit, Pinkie Pie said after hitting a changeling. Thanks, Applejack replied. I just hope the others are all right. I'm more concerned about Fluttershy and Angel than anything else. At least Fluttershy's getting appreciation. ... Fluttershy whimpered in pure fear as she crawled deeper underneath her bed, holding Angel close as they listened to the swarm of changelings buzzing around outside. Banging on her door and windows while searching for a way into her home, Angel whimpered in fear and snuggled close to the yellow Pegasus. Shh, shh. Everything's going to be all right, Angel, Fluttershy whispered to the frightened bunny, even though she wasn't so sure herself. The pounding on the windows and door grew louder and louder until they heard one of the windows suddenly break. Fluttershy squeaked before slapping a hoof over her muzzle, while Angel retreated underneath her wing. The changeling that broke the window squeezed itself in and flew to the front door and unlocked it. The changelings that surrounded the house immediately flooded in. Fluttershy's eyes fixed themselves on the creatures as they went through her home, clearly searching for her. On the verge of tears, Fluttershy closed her eyes tightly and silently prayed to Celestia that they would make their search quick and leave. She hasn't felt this much fear for her life since falling out of Cloudsdale during her foalhood. Please, make them go away. Any pony, please. ... Scootaloo watched as Rainbow Dash finished off the last of the changeling. The blue Pegasus panted and clearly looked exhausted. Bits of blood covered parts of her face and hooves. I'm kind of getting a Rainbow Factory reference to that, but I don't think that was intentional. Well, of course it wasn't intentional. She was just in a big battle with changelings. What am I saying? Anyway. She turned over to Scootaloo and the vicious... and the vicious she previously had softened into one of concern. My guess is it was supposed to be viciousness. But anyway. You alright there, Squirt? She asked gently. Rainbow Dash noticed that the filly was suddenly trembling, tears pouring down her face. Scootaloo lunged forward and wrapped her arms tightly around her neck. "Wah!" she bawled. "It was so scary! Ah!" Again, sorry for not screaming this out, but it's, again, late, like I'm doing most of my recordings. Rainbow Dash hugged the filly back tightly, like a mother comforting her foal. She whispered soothing things in her ear as she rubbed her back gently. There, Scootaloo. Everything's fine. There's no need to cry now." Rainbow Dash felt tears of her own beginning to run down her face silently. She genuinely cared for the little filly like a sister. If anything were to happen to her, she would lose it entirely. She already lost 2 ponies she cared about closely. She didn't need to lose another. While the two enjoyed their embrace, a changeling slowly crawled up from the house and onto the roof with a deadly glare in their eyes. When it proceeded to sneak up and attack Rainbow Dash from behind, it was quickly knocked off its feet by Star Knight when he swooped down from the sky with a pipe in his mouth and slammed it against its skull. Okay, the changeling fell to the ground with a large hole in its skull. That's disturbing. Well, like it said up at top, disturbing imagery. If that was the warning. Let me go check real quick. No, disturbing content. I'm sorry. Now I gotta find where I was again. Yeah, found it. Hold up. There we are. Star Knight dropped the now bloody pipe and turned to both mares, who looked very surprised. "Are you both alright?" he asked, his green eyes showing deep concern. Rainbow nodded. "We are, thanks," she replied as she stroked Scootaloo's mane. Star Knight nodded and a look of sympathy flashed over his eyes when he saw Scootaloo shivering in her arms. "Poor thing," he murmured as he gently wiped away a few of her tears. "You didn't do anything to deserve this. None of us did." Rainbow Dash placed a hoof on his shoulder. "We need to find my friends, especially Fluttershy. She can't handle this kind of situation alone." "Where does she live?" "Just near the edge of the Everfree Forest," Rainbow Dash explained as she placed Scootaloo on her back. "Come on, I'll lead the way." Both Pegasi didn't waste any time and quickly launched themselves into the night sky once more. ... Celestia let out a surprised cry when she felt the curved blade of Somber's scythe scrape the surface of her neck. Tiny shards of pure white fur fall to the floor swiftly. Celestia skidded back and quickly placed a hoof over her neck to check if there was any blood. The blade had been mere inches from her neck, but luckily it didn't leave any sort of injury. She looked up at Somber while panting softly. Somber let out an amused laugh when he saw the shock and confusion in her eyes. "You've gotten quite stale, Princess of the Sun. Still slow to react as always. Even Luna reacted faster than you." Celestia narrowed her eyes before she slammed the end of her halberd down against the floor, leaving a small indent. "You will pay for what you've done to my student," she yelled defiantly. Her aurora mane flowing elegantly behind her as it glittered underneath the lights. Somber barely had time to even react when the alicorn suddenly teleported in front of him, taking him by complete surprise. She slammed both hooves down on his chest and pinned him on his back. She used her magic to toss his scythe to the side before bringing her halberd up to his neck. Somber felt the golden blade brush against his skin hiding underneath his fur, but instead of acting frightened or intimidated, he remained calm and looked rather amused instead of afraid. "This ends now, Sombra," Celestia said coldly as she pushed the blade closer to his neck. Somber's eyes glowed green as he let out a dark chuckle. "Sweet Celestia," he purred. "It's never over if my blood continues to flow through my veins." He used all 4 of his hooves and shoved the larger pony off. He quickly had his scythe back by his side. "I will say this. You're putting up a much bigger fight than your previous student." Celestia growled and swung her halberd down once more. Somber quickly dodged to the left and rammed into the alicorn, pinning her down on her back against the carpeted floor. I'm sorry. She is quite the delicacy, I must say. I sensed her defiance and innocence in her during each session. Somber brought his face closer to Celestia's until their snouts were mere inches from one another. I found them delicious, he whispered with a wicked grin. Pure hatred and rage flashed across Celestia's eyes. She shoved the unicorn off without much problem and raised her halberd high while giving him a death stare. Your crimes will not go unpunished, Sombra. I will rescue Twilight as soon as I'm finished with you. Sombra cackled. Such devotion I sense in you towards your student, he said. I will admit that I do enjoy her company. Never had I met a mare with such talent in magic such as herself. So young, so soft, so innocent. Silence, you fool! Celestia screamed before a blast of light shot from her horn and headed straight for Sombra. Sombra easily dodged the attack by transforming into his shadow form once more and quickly changed back a few feet away. Now that's actually kind of a reference to Fall of the Crystal Empire, but instead of saying cur, she said fool. And instead of getting right up close to her, he went back, apparently. Anyway. From there he cast a spell of his own. A beam of dark energy shot across the throne room and towards Celestia. Thinking quickly, Celestia shielded her face with the blade of her halberd, and it shot back at Sombra. The gray stallion's eyes widened in both shock and horror as his own nightmare spell struck him head-on. He stumbled back and dropped his weapon as the world around him changed into a different setting. A much younger Sombra found himself standing above the surface of a frozen pond. Shadowy entrails of what had been his evil doppelganger held him in place as the ice underneath his hooves began to crack. Sombra! He heard Amberleaf cry out to him from the shadowy beach, his red scarf wrapped tightly around her neck as she looked at him with watery, fearful eyes. Amber, stay where you are, he called back before grunting when he felt the shadow's grip around him and tighten and grow much heavier. Sorry if I'm spacing these out sometimes, but I'm swallowing. The ice cracked at an alarming rate, and Somber felt himself begin to sink. He looked up at Amber one last time with a remorseful look, and was about to call out to her when he felt the ice finally give out. Sombra! Amber screamed as he went under. Sombra's world was quickly replaced with different shades of dark blue. He kept his terrified gaze on the only source of light coming from the large hole in the ice. He reached one hoof towards the light as though he was reaching for the light. No, 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 he thought frantically as he was dragged deeper into the cold water. I can't die. Not like this. Not by my own shadow. Not by the darkness. Sombra closed his eyes tightly and let out a silent cry as tears bubbled upward toward the frozen surface. The gray stallion felt himself slowly begin to fade in and out of consciousness as he wept to himself, not caring if he was breathing in water. The temperature dropped to a dangerous level the deeper the shadow dragged him. The hole where he fell from looked very far away by now, like a tiny star in a frozen blue sky that slowly dimmed out. Okay, it said it was on a frozen pond, but that's more so a lake. But anyway. His prayers for help to the Princess of the Sun faded as all hope of rescue diminished. Somber never felt so much fear in his life. Everything was dark, and it felt so cold. He was lonely and yearned to be on the surface with Amberleaf once more. I'm a fool. A damn fool to think I could master dark magic so easily. Father and Mother were right. Somber found himself finally drifting away from consciousness, and his thoughts remained on Amberleaf. I said on Amberleaf. The mare he was going to propose to sometime in the spring. He had visioned himself living out of the rest of his days in peace with the mare he loved, away from the drama of royalty and his parents, One final tear leaked from Somber's eye and floated up to the surface until it disappeared from view. "I'm so sorry, Amber," he whispered, or at least tried to. His vision finally begun to fade, and everything became a blur. Finally accepting his fate, Somber embraced the darkness, prepared to face whatever afterlife that was in store for him, but the fear he felt suddenly vanished. Instead, he felt a warm sense of security and comfort as the shadows cradled him in its dark grasp. "Poor Sombra," he heard his doppelganger's dark voice coo in his ear. "You look so exhausted. Don't bother fighting anymore. Open your eyes to the shadows. Let it embrace you in its comforting hold." I'm getting a reference to the Lord of the Rings from that. Anyway. Somber weakly opened his eyes halfway and found himself staring into the pure green eyes of his evil twin. His dark copy flashed him a sinister grin as he held him in a tight hold. Any attempt to move and his grip would tighten. His touch felt ice cold against his skin. No, I refuse," Somber whispered back weakly. He cringed slightly when he heard his doppelganger suddenly laugh. Somber then gasped in surprise and whimpered when he felt a dark tendril gently stroke his cheek. "Foolish stallion, you cannot escape your fate. You've made your choice in wishing to learn the secrets of dark magic. But don't worry, we, the shadows, will always be here for you. The light has done nothing for you. Let us in, and we will take you back to the surface." Somber's voice trailed off as he melted in the shadow's grasp. The embrace was warm and comforting, soft like the blankets back home in the castle he lived in. He did his best to fight back, but to no avail. He felt so tired now. "Welcome to the darkness, Sombra," his doppelganger whispered. "Just open your heart and hold us close in it. We will never abandon you like the light." ... That's not a transition, it's just what's said. Somber felt himself losing his battle against sleep. He suddenly forgot he was even in a lake. Having not hit the bottom and seemingly remained floating where he was, surrounded by nothing but darkness, with his doppelganger holding him tightly, it is because of this weakness did he finally give in to the darkness and opened both his heart and mind to it. "No," he whispered as the last of his mental barriers broke down and the darkness consumed him entirely and he lost consciousness completely. I'm sorry. Celestia watched in sheer astonishment as the dark unicorn fell to his knees while gripping the sides of his head, tears streaming down his face as he begged his unseen tormentor. "Stop," he whimpered. "Stop, please. I don't want this. Let me go. Get out of my head. Get out of my fucking head!" The dark unicorn screamed as he suddenly slammed his head down against the floor repeatedly, crying and screaming in a way Celestia's never seen before. If she didn't know he was under a spell, she would have thought he'd gone insane. Slowly, however, his head banging ceased. He opened his eyes as the spell finally wore off after about 30 minutes. He blinked away the last of his tears, as he pieced together what just happened. "Sombra," Celestia said, her voice showing neither hatred nor sympathy. Well, then I guess I said it wrong. "You attempted to master the dark arts by facing your shadow." She paused briefly, "but in the end you weren't strong enough to defeat him and gave in. The darkness you sought to tame corrupted your heart and mind." Somber slowly narrowed his eyes up to the Alicorn Princess as one last tear trailed down his cheek and hit the floor. Green completely covered his irises as wisps of purple smoke blazed from the corners of his eyes like flames as pure rage and anger overwhelmed him entirely. In the blink of an eye, a sudden blast of dark energy erupted from Somber's horn and struck Celestia. Celestia screamed in sheer agony as the blast knocked her off her hooves and caused her to crash against her throne. breaking off the back portion of it. The alicorn groaned softly to herself, wincing at every attempt she made to stand. Her eyes snapped open fully when she felt herself suddenly being lifted off the ground before being slammed against a pillar and then the ground. She could have sworn she felt something break. Ooh. Somber stood where he was, panting as the green slowly faded from his eyes and the purple smoke dissipated. He approached the fallen alicorn with his weapon raised. Celestia looked up at him and noticed that tears were beginning to fall from his eyes once more. Grunting in pain, she weakly lifted her head and spoke. Isn't there any way to reverse it? Can there be a way to free you? Somber suddenly threw his head back and howled with laughter. He then looked back at her with a maniac grin and a deadly look in his crimson eyes. You're so very naive to think you could find a way to help me of all ponies. After all, I stole your precious student from you. Celestia shifted slightly as she struggled to keep her head up a bit longer. I realized you are not a bad pony. Sombra, she whispered. You're just a good stallion who's been corrupted by the darkness and imprisoned in his own body as he watches his world fall apart. Shut up! Somber screamed tearfully before slamming his hoof down on her windpipe, causing her to suddenly gasp and choke for air. You don't know me! You don't fucking know me, you fucking whore! No pony can save me, and that's final! That's gruesome. Anyway. He continued slamming his hoof down on her throat until he heard something snap. Ouch. He glared hatefully at her as the last of his tears dried away. Celestia suddenly found it hard to breathe, and she couldn't move her legs and wings all of a sudden. It brought her great alarm as she let out a weak cry when she felt a sharp pain suddenly bolt down her spine. Sorry, my nose itches again. The double doors suddenly swung open. Somber looked over his shoulder and smirked when he saw who it was. Here she is, my precious jewel. Celestia barely caught a glimpse of the armored alicorn walking over to their location. She looked slightly worn out and had a few light scratches on her armor and weapon. My king, she cooed as she reached up to his muzzle, to nuzzle behind his ear. Somber smiled and nuzzled back affectionately, kissing the edge of her ear and causing her to giggle. Celestia's eyes then widened in recognition. She'd recognize that giggle anywhere. It was something she missed dearly since the day of the incident in the Crystal Empire. Twilight, she gagged, struggling to even speak as her voice cracked. A wave of disbelief and sorrow overcame her when her former student came into full view. Her entire appearance has changed, and she appeared to have been matured a bit as well. And wings. She'd received wings. Her dear student was now an alicorn. Tears brimmed her eyes as she struggled to say something else, but all that came out were gags and gargles. Twilight narrowed her eyes down at her and tisked disapprovingly. I expected better of this princess, she said, hatred lacing her tone. Your sister didn't put up much of a challenge. She's currently busy, I'm afraid. A dark smirk suddenly stretched itself across her face. Which should be enough time for me to have my revenge. Celestia looked up at her student tearfully and struggled to talk. She yearned to talk to her, comfort her, and apologize to her. She yearned to have her dearest student back. I paralyzed her from the neck down, Somber whispered in her ear, so there shouldn't be any problems about her escaping. Twilight looked up to her king and smiled lovingly at him. Thank you, my king, she whispered, pressing a kiss against his lips softly. You could join me if you like. I'd love that, Somber murmured. Celestia let out a weak whimper as both ponies surrounded her, clearly seeing the dark intentions they had for her in their eyes. You grab the left wing, I'll grab the right, Twilight said. What? Celestia wanted to ask. but the realization came quickly when she felt them grip the edge of her wings with their teeth. A weak, piercing scream erupted from her throat when she felt her wings being ripped off her body, skin and muscle following left from behind. Large patches of red, pulsing muscle were revealed from where her wings had been. She heard Twilight giggle above her, but it wasn't the giggle she had grown used to hearing. This one sounded dark, wicked. Now, wings being ripped off a pony, that reminds me of Swag.mov when Discord ripped off Rainbow Dashes. Anyway. Let's see if we can do something about this horn, Twilight mused as she tapped it with her hoof. No, Celestia thought frantically. Not her horn. Anything but her horn. She looked up at her student with a pleading look, but it only fueled Twilight's sadistic urges. Without second thought, she grabbed her former mentor's horn and yanked it off. Celestia let out a silent cry when she felt her horn separate from her body. Skin and bits of flesh hung off at the end. Blood dripped from the strings of muscle that hung down. Anyway, I didn't think horns were I knew horns were sections of the unicorn anatomy, but I thought they were just bone with nothing more than marrow in them. Anyway, Twilight let out a squeal of gloating delight as she gazed at the unicorn's horn in awe, or alicorn horn in awe. Somber smiled as his heart swelled with pride for his young queen. Twilight looked over at him with a wide, psychotic grin before she tackled him to the floor in a heated kiss. Somber sighed deeply in the kiss and wrapped his arms around her body, pressing her closer as their bodies warmed underneath their armor. "I love you," Twilight gasped after pulling away from the kiss. "Oh, I love you, Sombra." Somber grinned darkly at his queen before he reached up to nibble on her ear. "I love you too, my sweet Twilight," he whispered lustfully. Celestia watched in sheer disgust and horror as they embraced for another kiss. "Luna," she thought weakly. "Oh, Luna, please be all right. Help me." End of chapter 26. Another Cliffy! And no, Luna's not dead. North Gallus 2002 replied with, "Yeah, I forgot about Babs for a bit." Well, Babs wasn't in the last chapter during the whole incident with Granny Smith. Anyway. Jojo90 Nation replied with, "Thanks, glad to hear that." Solo Gamer X replied with, "Here's another Cliffy." Wildheart 1997 replied with, "Thanks." Big smile. My Demonic Heart and Soul replied with, "Yup." Cat smile. On to chapter 27. Warning: violence, blood, and death. Oh, I'm sorry. So, Cadence watched the battle from behind the bedroom window. She gritted her teeth anxiously and looked away, unable to bear the screaming of horrified and dying citizens any longer. A tear rolled down her cheek as she felt helpless to do anything. Instead, she was stuck with Amberleaf, who was quietly sitting in the corner. Finally, after 3 hours of doing nothing, she stomped her hoof down. "I can't take it any longer," she said. "I can't just stand here idly while my home is under siege." She turned to Amberleaf and, despite not trusting her for 1 minute, added, "I'm going out there to fight. You stay here and keep the door and window locked. Do not let any other pony in until I arrive back. Got it?" Amberleaf bobbed her head nervously. "Yes," she said. Cadence nodded and then walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her and using her magic to lock it from the outside, so no other pony could get in or out. She still didn't trust her for a minute. Once she found herself alone, Amberleaf went over to the window to watch the battle rage on. She will admit that Canterlot was indeed beautiful, and she liked being treated nicely by the other ponies, but she had a duty to fulfill, and she accomplished it. It would only be a matter of time until either Blackfire or Brayburn would come barreling down the door to take her back. As much as she liked staying here, she was really getting homesick, and she missed her beloved king. Looking away from the window, she went over to the dresser and pulled out the scarlet scarf she had worn since her arrival. She pressed her cheek against the soft fabric and rubbed against it as though one of the days before all this, before she lost Somber to the darkness. His greatest fear, after all, was getting pulled under by it. He is beyond saving now, and unfortunately for Twilight Sparkle, she is too. ... Fluttershy fell into Rainbow Dash's arms in a sobbing mess while Scootaloo held Angel. The group stood outside of her home with changeling corpses strewn about them. Star Knight walked out of her home, having finished off the last of the changelings, and dropped the bloody pipe he had brought along. His mane was slightly messy, and blood covered his face and parts of his neck. Rainbow looked about the same, but covered in less blood. "It was horrible," the yellow Pegasus whimpered in her friend's arms, clinging onto her as though her life depended on it. "Just horrible! They came out of nowhere!" "Shh!" Rainbow Dash hushed her friend gently as she stroked her pink mane. "Everything's going to be all right, Fluttershy. We're here now. We're going to find the others, and we'll pull through this together," the blue Pegasus added fiercely as she hugged her. Angel whimpered in Scootaloo's arms as the filly gently patted him in between the ears. "Poor Angel," she murmured sadly. "Dash! Fluttershy!" a voice suddenly called out. The group looked over in the direction of the call, and Rainbow Dash's eyes glittered happily when she saw Applejack and Pinkie Pie running down the path over to them. Fluttershy looked over as well and gasped in pure joy. "Pinkie Pie!" she cried happily. "And AJ too!" Rainbow Dash added. Both mares ran over, and it was long until they were captured in each other's tight embrace. "You're both all right," Rainbow Dash said after pulling away from her tight hug with Applejack. "My family's farm was attacked," Applejack explained. Her ears then flattened, and she lowered her head sadly. "Granny Smith's gone." There was a brief moment of silence between all of them until Fluttershy walked over and nuzzled behind her ear affectionately. "I'm sorry to hear that, AJ," she said softly. Pinkie Pie walked over and embraced her in a hug. "Thanks, girls," Applejack said after wiping away a few tears. "But there's more important things to worry about. We still have Spike, Trixie, Sweetie Belle, and Rarity to find." "We all know Rarity's in the hospital still," Rainbow Dash said. "And Trixie, Spike, and Sweetie Belle are in the boutique," Pinkie Pie added. "Where's Apple Bloom?" Scootaloo suddenly asked. "Is she all right?" "I don't know, honestly. She, Babs, and Strongheart went into town to find you and Sweetie Belle." "Oh no," the filly suddenly cried. "I have to find and help her. The Cutie Mark Crusaders always stick together." Scootaloo was about to attempt to take off when Star Knight stretched out his hoof and stopped her. "Alright, it's not safe to go alone, little filly. Take this!" Wait, no. "Take this, unicorn." I'm sorry. I had to make that reference. Dangerous to go alone, take this. Zelda, 1986. Or sometime around there. He warned. I don't think I said that, but anyway. "You're going to have to bring some of us with you. 2 at least." Having been in the Guard for almost a year or so, he knew about this kind of stuff. It wasn't wise to go alone during a battle like this. "Pinkie and I will go," Fluttershy suggested softly. Rainbow Dash nodded. "Applejack, Star Knight, and I will head over to Ponyville Hospital and get Rarity. You 3 head out to the boutique." Well, actually, going back to that sentence, I wouldn't have thought Fluttershy being brave enough to go into Ponyville. Excuse me. And wanting to face changelings head on. I know that's not what's actually happening, but I thought she would have wanted to stay away from there as much as possible until it was all over. Going back to where I was. "You 3 head out to the boutique. Apple Bloom and the others are more than likely to head out there first. Got it, Scootaloo said after placing Angel on her back. Rainbow Dash looked down at her #1 fan and gave her a concerned look. Despite all that has happened, there was still a flicker of determination in the young mare. Behind those frightened tears was a young strong mare, who was dedicated in helping her friends and becoming just like herself. She wouldn't forgive herself if something happened to her, but she knew she had to let her go. Be careful out there, she said while looking directly in her eyes. Okay, Squirt? The blue Pegasus cuffed underneath her chin affectionately. Scootaloo smiled and gave Rainbow Dash an assuring pat on her shoulder. Not under her shoulder, I'm sorry. I'll be fine, Rainbow Dash. Don't worry about me, she said. ... Cadence galloped through the now ruined halls of Canterlot Castle, running by guards who were busy fighting off enemy stallions. She made a swift turn and ran down an empty one, intending to make her way to the main entrance. She managed to find a sword lying around and decided to use that as her weapon. Even though she's never really killed any pony before, the mere thought of taking another life sent chills down her spine. But all around her she saw nothing but bloodshed and death. Outside, the large arched windows that brought in the moonlight from outside revealed the burning buildings in Canterlot and lit up the hall in a dim orange glow. Thick gray clouds of smoke filled the night sky and clouded away the stars and the moon like storm clouds. Cadence was so busy keeping her eyes on the burning city that she didn't notice the mutilated corpse laying on the floor. She cried in surprise when she tripped over it and fell to the floor. When she got up and looked over her shoulder to see who it was, her eyes widened in both shock and horror. Lying on the floor was none other than Blue Blood. Yay! Blue Blood's dead! That's good to hear. The stallion had been torn and mutilated beyond recognition. That's actually kind of dark. Anyway, the reason why she was able to recognize him was by his cutie mark. The stallion was missing all 4 of his limbs, and his eyes had been gouged out of their sockets and were lying a few feet away. Hairs from his mane lied strewn across the floor above a puddle of blood that surrounded him. That's... Okay, Blue Blood's dead, but that's a little far. That's utterly disturbing. I mean, just a simple stab and he's dead would have been fine. But mutilation like that? That's dark. Anyway, Cadence winced at the sight before she quickly turned her attention back to her destination. Soon she skidded to a complete stop when she spotted both Brayburn and Blackfire entering the castle with a few of their soldiers. Both looked in horrible condition. Blackfire was missing bits and pieces of his armor and was drenched in blood in some places. I'm sorry. Not from places, that'd be disgusting. Brayburn was missing his helmet. His long, brilliant gamboge mane covered half his face, making him look all the more menacing. Blood ran down the exposed half of his face like rain, and it also covered most of the mane and armored body. Well, well, well. If it isn't the failed queen of the Crystal Empire, Blackfire sneered. Cadence narrowed her eyes at the Crimson Pegasus before raising her sword with her magic, standing in a battle stance while her nostrils flared. I may not know who you are, soldier of Sombra, but you have no right invading my home. Looks like you intimidated her a bit, Brayburn sneered. Blackfire flashed the Earth Pony commander a toothy grin. One of us is going to have to retrieve Amberleaf while the other holds this one off, he said. I assume you want me to take the role of retrieval. I'd like that. Brayburn chuckled coolly and shook his head. Good luck, then, he said before whistling to his soldiers to follow him up the flight of stairs. Blackfire turned back to Cadence and raised his infamous halberd. I've never had to fight a mare before, he said as he slowly started to circle her. And I'm sorry if Blackfire's starting to sound like Sombra, but whatever. Like a lion hunting his prey. I've personally sparred with the queen and taught her how to fight with a weapon, but I've never found it to be a challenge. I can sense your devotion to Sombra, Cadence said smoothly as her eyes followed him. She then gritted her teeth and glared daggers at him. It's ponies with hearts as dark as yours and his that should be put down. Blackfire cackled in gloating amusement, his flaming orange eyes blazing with intensity as they shrunk to the size of marbles in an endless sea of white. His black-red highlighted mane flowed behind him like fire in the wind. As his black wings were pressed tightly against his armored body, the two of them didn't say a word to one another for a full minute. To Cadence, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Each passing second felt like years, knowing that Blackfire hasn't done anything yet to make her paranoid a bit. Anyway, I devote my life and soul to the king, Blackfire finally replied, although his tone was rather calm and cool. It's under his rule that I find purpose in my life. He makes me feel wanted. To him, I'm not some freakish crystal pony who lives in an orphanage for almost his entire life and was shunned by every pony else for being different. He saw me as something else. He made me feel important and loved. Of course, none of you will ever understand that. You're right, Cadence agreed. I won't. When she stopped her hoof on the ground and yelled, But that doesn't mean I won't stop you! Blackfire grinned even wider. Without even saying a word, he lunged at Cadence and swung his halberd down. The alicorn screamed in surprise when she felt the tip of the sharp blade pierce her fragile skin and left a thin cut across her cheek. She skidded back a bit before she narrowed her eyes hatefully at him. She then released a battle cry before she lashed out with her sword. The tip of her blade barely scratched the surface of his armor as he reeled back in reaction. Ugh! Cadence grunted when he knocked her to the floor with the end of his weapon. Cadence sat up and rubbed her head as he got closer. I expected better from an alicorn, he said as he loomed over. Nice try. He brought his face very close to hers and placed a small peck of the tip of her nose. Anyway, catching her by complete surprise. But I'm afraid you won't be able to survive long without losing a limb or two. Fuck you, Cadence snorted before she jumped to her hooves once more and raised her sword. I will keep fighting until the end, she roared before charging him head on. ... Trixie backed away slowly from the attic window, unable to handle watching the changelings wreck Ponyville any longer. Instead, she went over to where Spike was sitting with Sweetie Belle curled up beside him and laid down. How long do you think this is going to keep up? She asked in a tired tone, her eyes becoming droopy-looking. Spike shrugged, looking tired as well. No clue, he answered while he patted Sweetie Belle's mane as she slept with her head on his lap. I just hope the others are all right, especially Rarity. Your friends seem like strong ponies, Trixie said as she raised her head up slightly. I'm pretty sure they'll be fine. But what about Rarity? Spike asked. She lost her horn. She'll never be able to defend herself during something like this. Plus, she's still emotionally unstable. Nose itch. I'm sorry. Hey, she's not the only one whose life's been changed forever. I'd rather be up like this than go to sleep with the fear of having those same nightmares again. Spike decided not to say anything else and sighed heavily. I just want to see Rarity again. I want to be there for her, protect her from these changeling bastards, but... He slowly closed his eyes and allowed his voice to trail off. Trixie gave the baby dragon a sympathetic look and reached over to pat his back assuringly. I may not know what your life is like around her, she said, but she's lucky to have you around. No pony's ever been around for me. Spike looked over his shoulder and gave Trixie a small smile as he gently placed one of his little claws over her hoof. You've got us now, he said. Trixie smiled back, but then froze in alarm when she heard some noise from below them. Spike came to a standstill as well, both tensed when they heard the secret entrance way shift loudly in its spot before being removed. Had the changelings discovered them? What's going to happen now? Were they going to kill them, or worse? Sweat beaded on both of their foreheads as they did their best to remain absolutely still. The last thing they wanted to do was convince them that they are up there. Sweetie, a young voice called below. Spike? Trixie? Is any pony up there? It sounds like Apple Bloom, Spike said. Remember, Trixie warned, changelings can make themselves look like any pony you know. But Apple Bloom knows about this part of the boutique, Spike said. She and Scootaloo. He then perked up when he felt Sweetie Belle suddenly stir in his arms. The filly fluttered her eyes open and yawned. Sweetie Belle, please, if you're up there, say something, Apple Bloom pleaded. Sorry, nose itch. Anyway. Sweetie Belle perked up when she heard her friend's voice. Apple Bloom, she cried. Apple Bloom, we're up here. It wasn't long until a pale, light grayish, olive-colored head poked up from the entrance. A large, light, brilliant crimson-colored bow wrapped tightly around her brilliant amaranth-colored mane. Joy flashed across her brilliant gamboge-colored eyes when she spotted them, and she revealed herself even more. A grin was plastered on her face before she looked down at the others below her. They're up here, she said before climbing out of the ladder. Apple Bloom, Sweetie Belle squealed happily before the two embraced one another in a tight hug. You're all right. You're actually all right. Babseed was the next to climb up the ladder. The city filly grinned happily when she saw Sweetie Belle and happily joined the embrace. Strongheart came next and soon found herself in the embrace as well. Excuse me. We thought we'd never find you, Strongheart sobbed. At least we know you're still alive, Babs said. The girls then pulled away from the group hug and grinned at one another before turning to Trixie and Spike. Are you both all right? Apple Bloom asked. We're fine, Spike replied. Where's Applejack and Big Mac? Big Mac's at the farm, Apple Bloom replied. One of those freaks was in our home and Winona attacked it, but got injured too. The creature, she sniffled, killed Granny Smith. Sweetie Belle let out a horrified gasp. No, she cried, not Granny Smith. Apple Bloom bobbed her head sadly. It's true. And Applejack went out to try and help her friends, but I don't know where she is exactly. Well, now that we're together, perhaps we can look for them, Spike said. I've got enough magic to fight off any changelings who decide to mess with us. Everyone else nodded. Together they left the attic and made their way out of the boutique, which was now an entire wreck. Torn dresses were all over the place, while important sewing equipment lay scattered on the floor. Oh, would Rarity throw in a massive fit. Anyway, Rarity's sewing machine had been broken beyond repair. Ooh. And now laid on the table in a heap of wrecked metal. The front door had been torn off its hinges and now laid outside broken in two. Be careful of the glass, girls, Trixie said softly as she guided them away from the glass shards that lay on the floor. For a moment they all thought they were out of the woods, but they were far from it. Halfway through outside, Sweetie Belle let out a horrified gasp and pointed her hoof at the sky. Look! She cried as a swarm of changelings came raining down on them Ah, crap, Babs yelled as they surrounded them. We're trapped! We're all gonna die! Sweetie Belle wailed. Again, sorry I'm not screaming this, because it's in caps. But, again, near 12:30 a.m. Sweetie, get a hold of yourself! Apple Bloom ordered, although she felt afraid herself. Wah! No. Yeah! A shriek came ripping through the air. Or a shriek ripped through the air around them as a flash of pink came running in with what looked like a beaten-up frying pan. Get away from them, you freaks! Pinkie Pie screamed as she slammed their heads down with her frying pan. Trixie, Spike, Apple Bloom, Strongheart, Sweetie, Babseed, Fluttershy called as she galloped over to them at record time and skidded to a stop. Fluttershy, Spike said happily before he embraced the yellow Pegasus. Look, there's Scootaloo and Angel too, Sweetie Belle added. Apple Bloom, Scootaloo cried. Scootaloo, the filly cried back. Soon the Crusaders embraced tearfully after finally getting reunited. Pinkie Pie managed to scare away the remaining changelings after splitting one skull in two. A beaten frying pan can do that? Anyway. She turned back to her friends and happily embraced all of them in a death hug, including Trixie. I'm so glad every pony's all right, she sobbed. They all breathed a sigh of relief as soon as she released them. We're happy to see you too, Pinkie, Spike panted. ... When Rainbow Dash and her friends arrived at Ponyville Hospital, they were surprised to find that almost the entire town was hiding out there. They were hesitant to let them in at first until Vinyl... Hey! managed to convince them that they were the real ones. Thanks, Rainbow Dash said, thanking the unicorn DJ. No prob, Dash, Vinyl replied. She led the group of three through the crowd of terrified, saddened, and wounded citizens. When we found Rarity, she was practically hiding underneath the bed, Vinyl explained, removing her glasses out of respect. Lyra, Derpy! Ah! Are with her now. She's practically hyperventilating. Nurse Redheart is currently looking for a sedative to calm her down with. When they arrived to her room, they found her wrapped tightly in Derpy's arms as Lyra rubbed her back. Oh, that's nice. The poor mare was shaking and wheezing from the sheer terror she felt. It was just too much for her. Spike, she whimpered. I want Spike. Rainbow Dash, Star Knight, and Applejack exchanged worried glances. Dash felt Star Knight gently nudge her a bit with his muzzle. Go to her, he whispered. She's your friend. Rainbow Dash nodded and turned to the scared unicorn. Swallowing, she slowly approached her. Rarity? She asked gently as she got closer to the bed. Be careful, Lyra warned. She's a bit unstable. She might not recognize your voice right away. Rainbow Dash nodded. When she finally got to the edge of the bed, she cautiously reached her hoof out to the mare. Rarity? She asked as she touched her shoulder slightly. The blue Pegasus then backed away in sheer shock and horror when her friend suddenly let out an ear-shattering scream and started to thrash in Derpy's arms. Aw. Rarity, calm down! I said calm down! Derpy yelled as she struggled to keep her still. Rarity, stop it! Applejack yelled as she ran over and embraced her horrified friend, hugging her tightly and holding her close as she whispered soothingly in her ear. It's okay, Rarity. It's going to be okay. I promise. We'll make it out of this. Rarity started to calm down, and she looked up at the Earth Pony with watery eyes. Applejack? She asked in a quivering voice. Rainbow Dash lowered her head sadly and walked out of the room and stood in the dark hallway. pressing her head against the wall and allowing her the tears to fall. Star Knight followed her out and pulled her in for an embrace. Dash clung on to the other Pegasus tightly and buried her face in his neck. Shh, he cooed gently as he rubbed her back. There's no need to cry now, Dash. We're here for you. I'm here for you. Star, she sobbed quietly against his white fur. I just want this night to end already. I know, Dash. I know. ... Cadence howled with pain as she was slammed against the wall. Her weapon locked with Blackfire's. They both locked eyes, and the Alicorn immediately saw the madness that stormed within his psyche. Years of hardship and struggle all before that. She'd feel pitiful for him if it wasn't for trying to kill her right now. Or if he wasn't trying to kill her right now, I'm sorry. Blackfire smirked darkly before he finally pulled away from her. Cadence fell on all fours in exhaustion and dropped her weapon. Weak. Blackfire purred casually as he approached her. It's no wonder you weren't able to save the Empire, or your husband. Cadence slowly looked up at the Crimson Pegasus and glared hatefully at him, tears brimming in her eyes. She did or say nothing about it. Instead, she dropped her weapon and lowered her head in defeat. Do it, she said in an uncaring tone of voice. Just get it over with. A grin flashed across Blackfire's face as he approached the Alicorn with his weapon raised. He aimed the blade of the halberd towards her neck before pulling it back. Any final words? He asked. Cadence shook her head. She had no words left to say, nor any tears to be shed. Spent all of that mourning the loss of her husband and sister-in-law. She closed her eyes tightly and calmly braced herself for the moment where for her world would go black and she would see a light at the end of a tunnel. Standing there, she imagined, was shining armor and twilight sparkle waiting for her, and her parents too. Despite everything, she was ready to be reunited with the ponies she loved. But to her surprise, the death blow never came. She snapped her eyes open when she heard galloping coming down from the hall behind Blackfire and spotted Brayburn with Amberleaf closely by his side, her red scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Blackfire! He called after skidding to a stop. I am not pronouncing that word right. Stop in front of the main doors. I've got Amber. Let's go. Aw, come on, Blackfire groaned, allowing the blade of his halberd to slam to the floor as he gave the Earth Pony a disappointed glance. Are you serious? I was about to kill this Alicorn here, he whined. Brayburn narrowed his eyes at him darkly and stomped his hoof firmly on the ground, hard enough to leave a small indent. What is with all these small indents? You'll have your fun later. Right now, we've got a job to do. Blackfire rolled his eyes. Fine, he sighed before turning away from the Alicorn Princess and followed Brayburn up and the others out. I'm sorry. But not before stopping briefly to grin at Cadence. Don't lose your head while I'm gone, he called. His words sent chills down Cadence's spine and she fell to the floor in tears. That was a close one, a voice suddenly spoke in the emptiness that now surrounded her. Aw, why the long face? Cadence raised her head and looked around at the room for the source. Who's there? Show yourself, she snapped. Was she going crazy? Is she beginning to hear voices in her head? Then she must be. I'm guessing that's supposed to be if she's beginning to hear voices in her head, then she must be. Perhaps she spent a little too much time in the woods. As if reading her mind, the voice added, You're not going crazy, my dear. I'm as real as I can get. Cadence looked around the room frantically until her eyes were fixed on an old painting that depicted the days before Discord's rule. Oh. Well then. I guess we now know where this is heading. It showed the Alicorn sisters and the Dragon Equus hovering just above them. In the blink of an eye, The dragon equus suddenly came to life. It's a shame to see such a lovely alicorn in so much pain. Well, if it's not caused by me, he laughed. Cadence suddenly gasped in horror, and it took a few steps back. Discord, she whispered. The dragon equus then appeared before her very eyes. Ta-da! He said proudly, with streamers and confetti falling all around them as though he had just thrown a surprise party. Only Discord. Well, then again, Pinky would have done that too, but... Yet before he could even say a proper word, he was suddenly slammed against the floor with Cadence's magic. The pink alicorn walked up to his face and glared at him. What are you doing out of your prison? She hissed, pressing her sword against his neck. Discord merely smiled coolly as he did, and didn't even look the slightest intimidated by her move. In case you haven't noticed, my dear, there's a complete and utter chaos outside. He then snapped his fingers and was back on his feet once more. Cadence stumbled back in surprise. And not the good kind, he added. Cadence frowned and got back on all fours. Are you saying that the chaos you cause is for good rather than evil? Well, no, Discord replied. The chaos I cause is for evil intent, but in case you haven't noticed, mine is nothing compared to what's happening outside. Are you telling me that you've never destroyed villages or killed ponies during your reign? She found it hard to believe. I've done some things to them, Discord replied, but I've never destroyed or killed. The chaos I caused was out of the pure mischief and fun in my eyes. Cadence rolled her eyes and shook her head. I don't have time for this, she groaned before picking up her sword and making her way over to the large flight of stairs that led to the throne room. She stopped when Discord suddenly appeared in front of her with his fists against his hips. And just where do you think you're going? He asked, annoyance hinted in his voice. I'm not done talking to you. I have more important things to do, Cadence simply replied as she walked around him, like helping my aunts. She then groaned in annoyance when Discord teleported in front of her again. In case you haven't noticed for a third time, that's why I'm here. Cadence looked up at him with a confused expression. Why would you want to help the ones who imprisoned you in stone 1,000 years ago? Surely you must hate them for that. I do, Discord replied bluntly. But I can't just stand idly by while some pony else takes care of them for me. If I'm going to have my revenge, I'd rather do it myself. Cadence narrowed her eyes and raised her weapon at him. Then I'm afraid I can't let you pass, she whispered coldly. It was then that Discord rolled his eyes in complete annoyance. I'm not going to do it right away, he said as he casually pushed the sword away from his face. I've freed myself for a reason, and that's to help all of you with your little predicament with Sombra. Cadence then brought her face up to his and stared deeply into his light yellow eyes, checking for any sort of deceit or trick. To her surprise, she found none. And why should I trust the likes of you? She asked slowly. Discord stared deep into Cadence's eyes and smirked. Because I've dealt with Sombra before, he replied equally. ... Twilight continued to stare idly at Celestia's fallen form with a blank expression. Satisfaction swelled in her heart, for she finally had her revenge on the alicorn she once looked up to. She once considered her almost like a mother, but by now Celestia could only manage tiny breaths of air, her chest rising and lowering ever so slightly to avoid pain in her lungs, which she was sure was punctured by a rib. Her eyes were closed and, at first glance, one would have mistaken her for dead, but she stubbornly clung on to that tiny thread of life she still had. Why won't you just die? Twilight snorted. Celestia cringed slightly when she heard the bitterness in her tone. She attempted many times to make a telepathic link with her so that they could communicate, but the younger alicorn always managed to block her. She always spent what very little remained of her strength to try to reach out to her, but she realized she couldn't move a single limb. Behind her, Somber was finished destroying the last of the elements, crushing each jewel as though they were nothing. The elements were now no more. Well, it's such a pity Luna couldn't be with us tonight. Somber sighed after stomping the element of magic. I would have wanted to see her reaction once she sees you and the elements destroyed. Looks like you're going to get your wish. Twilight laughed softly just as the double doors slammed open to reveal a wrecked and exhausted-looking Alicorn. Luna's eyes widened in sheer horror when she saw the scene before her. Celestia's horn on one side and her wings on the other. Her golden halberd snapped in two, but what horrified her most of all was the mutilated body of her sister lying in a pool of her own blood. "Celestia!" she screamed loudly as tears ran down her face. Her scream left Somber and Twilight's ears ringing slightly. She then snapped her head up at them with the deadliest look she's ever given. Her lips were curled back, eyes widened and blazing with unequal rage, and her nostrils flared. "I will kill every last one of you!" she roared before she charged directly at the evil couple. Luna charged at frightening speed, intending to kill. For the first time since her capture, Twilight felt fear. She's never seen this side of Luna before. She suspected that this was something Nightmare Moon would have had. She looked up to her husband, and was surprised to find him calm. Luna lunged forward with a battle cry and aimed for Somber first, but what happened next took her and Twilight by complete surprise. Somber used his magic to freeze her in place before gently placing his hoof on her cheek affectionately. Huh? Luna felt all of her rage and hatred toward the Alicorn suddenly melt away once he touched her. She looked into his crimson eyes with innocent confusion. Shh. Somber hushed her before he gently stroked her cheek. I'm sorry. I got a lot of gas. Luna was slowly and gently placed back on her hooves. All of her hatred was immediately replaced with grief and sorrow when she saw her sister lying motionless on the floor. She broke down on the spot and fell on her knees as she wept over her sister's body. "Celestia! Celestia!" She bawled like a little filly. She cried so hard that she didn't notice the daring move Twilight made as she wrapped her arms around her and brought her close. Luna's face was pressed against the cool armor Twilight wore as the young Alicorn caressed her elegant mane. "It's over now, Luna," Twilight said softly. "She's gone. The world will be an eternal night forever now. Isn't that what you always wanted?" The Princess of the Night whimpered in her arms, unable to pull herself away from her seemingly caring grasp. She sensed the changes in her heart and mind, and right away she lost all hope of ever saving her. But now she was alone. Her sister was forever gone from this world, and she wasn't strong enough to raise both the sun and the moon herself. Yes, she did want eternal night to fall upon Equestria, but that was a long time ago. During her return, she's grown to like the sunlight, seeing the blue sky and the white puffy clouds that floated above them, seeing the rainbows after a storm arch over them in a spectacular array of colors, seeing the flowers blossom underneath the sunlight. It certainly was more lively during the day than the night. Well, that's true, but I do find the night sky more beautiful than the day. But whatever. The world would fall into sub-zero temperatures without the sun's light. But she suddenly found herself unable to care anymore. "Princess," Twilight whispered in her ear, "you don't have to be alone anymore. Despite all that's happened to me, I'm still Twilight." She hugged her tightly. "Join us, Luna, and you will be able to rule the night like how you've always wanted." Luna tensed. She couldn't betray all of her friends like this, especially her sister. She felt a curling sense of anxiety in her broken heart as her worst fear was becoming Nightmare Moon, of becoming Nightmare Moon once more came to light. She felt the world around her grow dim, and shadows slowly began to creep in like hungry wolves. Well, will you join us? No, that's wrong. Well, will you join us, Nightmare Moon? Somber asked with a sinister grin as he watched her irises suddenly become cat-like. ... By the time Cadence and Discord arrived in the throne room, it was empty. All but Celestia and her horn and wings remained. She gasped in horror when she saw the damage done to her adoptive aunt. No, she cried as she galloped over to her fallen body and wept. No, 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 no! This can't be happening! Discord surveyed the damage done all around them and to the princess. An unfamiliar sense of rage kicked in as he clenched his lion paw to a tight fist. This is beyond what he would have done. He would have just humiliated Celestia before turning her into stone, not maim her to the point she was close to dying. She's not dead, he said after finding a pulse. Cadence looked up at him with watery eyes. Can't you help her? She asked. Discord stiffened slightly. The last thing he thought he would do is help the one who imprisoned him, but he couldn't bear the thought of watching Celestia die before him. I can heal any internal injuries she might have, he said, but I'm afraid I can't help her with her horn and wings. Better than nothing, Cadence sighed. Just save her, please. She and Luna are the only family I have left. All right, Discord said while rolling his eyes. No need to tell me your life story. Just step back a bit so I can have some space to work with. Healing internal injuries isn't exactly easy, you know. And it looks like I've got my work cut out for me this time, he added mentally as he started with the broken spine. End of chapter 27. Sorry about using brilliant a lot. I look up the characters on the wiki, and apparently almost all of the colors they are have brilliant in them. I worked almost the entire night on this chapter. My demonic heart and soul replied with, yeah, sorry about that. Princess Midnight Moon replied, almost did. North Gillis 2002 replied with, I'm still debating on whether or not I should give this fic a happy ending of sorts, but I certainly won't be happy. All butterflies and rainbows type of happy ending. Excuse me. All in all, the ending hasn't been confirmed as of yet. Zelfra1234 replied with, I'm afraid Twilight is forever lost in the dark side of the Force. Really? Reference to Star Wars? Anyway. X-SoloGamerX replied with, thanks, I guess. Big laugh. Lucifira replied with, I guess that makes me, ties belt around, black belt around head, a cliffhanger master. I may not have a black belt, but I have a dragon headband. Miss Moonshoes Potter replied with, I will be honest here, your comment really cracked me up. Anon replied with, thanks. Wildheart1997 replied, your comment inspired me to do that to Luna. Big laugh. That's 2 chapters down, 3 to go. Warning. A love scene and disturbing content. Well, from experience, we both know where this is going. Chrysalis was proud of her children. She dropped the corpse of Mayor Mare after ripping off a leg and devouring it. Around her, a few of her changelings finished what was left of the former mayor. The sound of screams, flames, and flesh-ripping filled her ears like music. Looking at what was happening around her, or before her very eyes, the carnage and destruction around her was a sign of their redemption. Their defeat in Canterlot was a humiliating loss, but now that Ponyville was burning around her, the outlook of their future was starting to look good. "My queen!" one of her changelings cried in their telepathic bond. "The horizon! Look towards the horizon!" Wiping some blood away from the corner of her muzzle before looking in the direction of Canterlot, she had a hunch that it would be in that direction. Her eyes then widened when she spotted the first and second platoon of Royal Guard Pegasi flying in. Their golden armor flashed underneath the moonlight. "Changelings!" she boomed in the link she had with her children. Every changeling that was in Ponyville stopped what they were doing and surrounded their queen in the square. "Take to the skies and retreat!" They didn't waste time quickly spreading their bug-like wings and allowed their queen out of Ponyville, and followed their queen out of Ponyville, and disappeared into the darkness of the night before the guards even had a chance to attack. Applebloom, Babseed, Strongheart, Scootaloo, Sweetie Belle, Angel, Trixie, Spike, Fluttershy, and Pinkie Pie all emerged from their hiding place inside the building, as changelings were nothing but specks in the distance. The CMC were shaken by what they had just seen. Mare had been reduced to nothing but a blood skeleton with bits of flesh still hanging on. She wasn't the only, though. The changelings were like locusts. They attacked any pony they saw outside and devoured them, whether dead or alive. Skeletons littered the ground around them as they walked into the open a bit more. Pinkie Pie suddenly lost control of her dinner and vomited on the spot. Well, that's something that hasn't happened yet. Vomiting. Surprised it happened so late in the story. Anyway, the first platoon quickly landed in front of them with concerned looks on their faces. "Are you all right? Or are all of you all right?" the captain asked. "Sort of," Trixie replied shakily, not used to seeing so much death and destruction around her. She was beginning to miss traveling around Equestria, where she didn't have to worry about all this. This is even worse than the nightmares she had to endure in her torture. "The second platoon is searching for any survivors," the captain said as his first platoon went through what remained of some of the buildings. "We're going to try to put out the fires as well." "What took you guys so long?" Applebloom asked. "Applebloom, that's rude," Spike said. "We ran into some trouble on our way here," the captain explained as he looked at the carnage around him. Half-eaten bodies, skeletons, and changeling corpses were all over the place. It was enough to cause the normally strong-willed stallion to shudder underneath his armor. "Sir," the stallion suddenly landed beside him. "We've found other civilians. They took refuge in Ponyville Hospital." The captain nodded. "How many survivors?" he asked. "Half the town, sir," the stallion replied, "counting the patients." "Ponyville Hospital?" Scootaloo gasped. "That's where Dash is." "Maybe the others are there too." "Sorry," Sweetie Belle added. "Sir!" Spike approached the stallion and craned his neck up so that they were eye to eye. "We must go to Ponyville Hospital. I have a friend there who's going through a lot of problems right now." The captain nodded. I'll have two escorts go with you. We can't take the risk of letting all of you get under attack. There's still the risk of them returning." "Yes, thank you so much," Spike said. The entire walk to the hospital was a quiet one. The group did their best to ignore the stench of death all around them. Excuse me. Along with the corpses. When they arrived, they were quickly reunited with the rest of their friends. The groups embraced one another in tearful hugs and cries. Applejack hugged her baby sister, cousin, and Strongheart tightly in her arms. Rarity sobbed in once she embraced Spike. Sweetie Belle and Trixie. Rainbow Dash embraced Scootaloo in a tight hug while Star Knight wisely gave them some space. "Are you all right?" she asked the young Pegasus after checking for any injuries. "Mentally scarred for life, that's for sure," Scootaloo replied shakily, adding some dark humor that felt like a good idea at the time. "But I'll live." You were really brave going out like that, Star Knight complimented as he playfully ruffled her mane. You should be proud of yourself. Scootaloo blushed slightly and giggled. Thanks. Say, isn't this supposed to be sunrise now? Pinky suddenly added aloud. Or asked aloud, I should say. It's been night for an awfully long time, and the moon hasn't gone down yet. Maybe Celestia and Luna are busy preparing to come here, Fluttershy replied. Nah, I highly doubt it. They had all night to do that, Applejack said. Anyway, sorry. They do have Canterlot to worry about, Applejack added. No, I'm sorry, Rainbow Dash added. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused on my ponies. Spike's eyes suddenly widened before he coughed up a scroll. That hasn't happened for a while, he coughed. It's a message from Canterlot, Applejack said before opening the scroll. From Cadance? Why would Cadance be sending us a message? Rarity asked. The others shrugged. It says that Canterlot was under attack, Applejack cried. What? The others screamed in unison. But how? Pinkie Pie asked, as they all gathered around Applejack and read the message themselves. Hold on, I'm trying to read who's... It was a surprise attack from Somber and his forces. Half the place was destroyed, and Celestia's been severely wounded while Luna's gone missing. She wants us to come to Canterlot as soon as we can. She wants Trixie to come as well. Trixie blinked, feeling a bit surprised. Me? She asked. After her ears, either her ears were really playing tricks on her, or Princess Cadance really wants her to come to Canterlot as well. I'll stay here in Ponyville and help the wounded, Star Knight said. I'm part of the Royal Guard, after all. I'm sorry. We'll head back to the farm, then, Apple Bloom said. Big Mac is probably worried sick. Applejack nodded in approval after she closed the scroll. You do that. And try to stay out of harm's way until we return. Yes, ma'am! The Crusaders said in unison. ... Okay. There was no victory party when Somber and his forces returned home. Even though they lost only a hoofful of soldiers, it was still a major victory for them. For him, anyway, I'm sorry. Battle-worn and drenched in blood, every pony who participated and survived went along to clean themselves up and turn in for the night, or whatever time it was. The ones who had been wounded reported to the infirmary, depending on how serious the injury was. Somber and Twilight both stepped out of the bathroom after taking a rather hot bath together. Her cheeks were all still slightly red as they crawled into bed. She let out a soft, relaxed moan once her body touched the soft, silky black sheets. As soon as she laid her head down on a pillow and closed her eyes, she felt a much larger weight press against her back. She giggled when she felt her king kiss the back of her neck. Feeling satisfied tonight, about what happened tonight, he purred in her ear while caressing her wings. Yes, Twilight breathed, feeling her face warm up slightly. Oh no, it's already going there. Somber smirked and rolled off his wife, who was now beet red. He then rolled onto his side and lovingly caressed her long mane. Twilight turned over so that she was on her side facing him. Somber lovingly brushed her bangs to the side to reveal more of her beautiful face and pulled her in for a deep kiss. Twilight moaned when she felt him wrap his tongue around hers. Beautiful, he whispered. You're so beautiful. Sombra. Shh. Sombra hushed the young Alicorn with another kiss before gently pushing her back and straddling her. You like where this is going, Vinyl? You like where this is going? Me neither. Anyway, from there Twilight took the time to admire her husband's look. He looked so handsome with his mane down and wet like that. The moonlight slipping through their bedroom window caused his dark gray coat to shine dimly. His scarlet eyes glowed in the dark as they gazed down at her with the utmost love and care. He's a different stallion when they're alone like this. She always saw him as a cruel, tyrannical unicorn, she was led to believe, but as time went on, she realized that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Well, being a bookworm, she should have known that quote, or that saying by heart. Anyway, she immediately wrapped her legs around his waist to pull him closer, whimpering when she felt him lick one of her developing teats. And after their victory in Canterlot, she needed her king more than ever now. Somber trailed his muzzle up and nuzzled her neck lovingly before easing himself in. I don't like this imagery. I don't. Anyway, Twilight gasped and wrapped her arms around his neck as well. Panting very close to his ear, Somber moaned as her walls clenched around him before he pulled out, only to... I swear I'm gonna throw up. Only to thrust back in. Twilight threw her head back and moaned loudly, urging him to go faster as she cried out his name. I'm not gonna do that, Sombra, she shrieked, moaning with each thrust. Sombra, fuck me, fuck your sweet Twilight. I'm sorry, I'm not getting into character here because I am disgusted. My guess is she is too. Vinyl. Twilight's daring words caused Sombra to thrust faster, apparently. He gripped her shoulders tightly as he pumped his member in and out of her sweet cave. I swear I'm gonna throw up one of these chapters. Anyway, the heat between them intensified, and the both of them felt sweat beginning to run down their faces. Somber looked down at his wife and took in the pleasured expression she had on her face. Both of her eyes were shut tightly, and her mouth was slightly agape as she made the most delicious moans he's ever heard. Oh. I'm sorry, I'm not moaning. No. It wasn't long before the king reached his breaking point and spilled his seed in the mare he loved before collapsing beside her after she reached completion as well. I swear, I am going to throw up. But both ponies turned and wrapped each other in their arms. Sombra caressed Twilight's sweaty mane, as she snuggled her face into his chest. Sombra, she whispered tiredly. Sombra replied, feeling nothing but contentment now. What are we going to do about her? The young Alicorn asked, looking up at her king. Sombra pondered the question for a bit, replying, Let her rest here for now. She's very exhausted from your little feud. We'll come up with something tomorrow. What if she betrays us? It was my idea to welcome her and all, but still. She won't, Sombra replied. She has nothing left to live for. Now that her sister is gone, she can finally have the eternal night she always wanted. As long as we give her Canterlot, that is. Twilight nodded silently. Of course, she murmured, as she drifted in and out of sleep. Rest, Somber crooned. It's been a long night for all of us. Twilight didn't object to this and happily complied. Dot, dot, dot. At least that's over. It was hard to find a train that was still able to take them to Canterlot. Sorry. Oop. Oh, sorry. But Rainbow Dash and her friends found a way to get there. As soon as they stepped off the train, they were horrified by the carnage before them. What had once been a majestic city of beauty and elegance has now been reduced into nothing but charred and destroyed ruins. All around them, remaining guards did their best to help any survivors of the siege. Bodies were strewn on every part of the street as they made their way to Canterlot Castle, which was surprisingly still standing. Somewhere in the ruined city, they heard a mare cry, possibly over the loss of a loved one or what's happened. The funny thing is, the sun hasn't risen yet. Rainbow Dash spotted a clock tower and noticed that it was 9:08 in the morning, yet it was still dark out and with the moon and the stars. "It's so cold," Fluttershy whispered. Her friends couldn't agree more. Pinkie Pie walked beside Fluttershy and snuggled up against her in an attempt to keep her warm. Fluttershy smiled gratefully at her friends. "Thanks." When they arrived in the courtyard of Canterlot Castle, bodies of ponies in both golden and obsidian armor littered the area. The remaining guards spent surveying the area and helping any wounded ponies they found, enemy or not. Canterlot Castle was a complete wreck. Windows were broken and a few spots were crumbled, leaving wide-open holes in the castle walls. They arrived in the throne room. They found Cadance pacing back and forth anxiously. She didn't look too bad, walking out of the whole incident with only scratches and bruises. She topped and turned their head to them, or her head, I'm sorry, as soon as she heard them walk in. "Thank goodness you've all survived," she said, walking up to them with a smile on her face. Rainbow Dash and the others quickly bowed in respect before looking back at her. "Why'd you call for us, Princess?" But that's not what the sentence truly says. What it truly says is, "Why did you call for your us, Princess?" I'm sorry, I know you don't want me to criticize it so much, but just minor details. "And what the heck happened to Canterlot?" Pinkie Pie added. Cadance slowly closed her eyes and sighed sadly as she turned to one of the windows that still had glass on it. She then opened her eyes and gazed at what remained of Canterlot. "Somber's forces got us in a surprise attack. Soon after, we sent the 1st and 2nd Squadron to Ponyville's aid. The attack got us all by surprise. We barely had time to even react since we were getting ready to head over to Ponyville ourselves. The attack was devastating." "Where's Princess Celestia and Luna?" Fluttershy asked. "And why hasn't the sun been risen yet?" Cadance continued to gaze out the window as she closed her eyes once more. "She's been severely wounded," she replied. The mares gasped in horror when they heard this. "But how?" Rarity cried. Sorry. "She's Princess Celestia of all ponies," Trixie added. Who could have done this? Rainbow Dash whispered. "We believe it was Sombra," Cadance replied. Her wings had been ripped off her body, and her horn was too. Even the stump was gone. It looked more like it had been torn off. "Torn off?" Rarity repeated slowly. Her eyes widened in awe and disbelief. Cadance bobbed her head slowly, and the others cringed at the image of their heads. In their heads, I'm sorry. Rarity swallowed hard as her eyes slowly trailed up to the stump of her forehead. She had a pretty good idea on who could have really done this. Somber couldn't have done this all alone. She looked over to her friends and heard that little voice in the back of her head telling her to tell them. "I can't," she thought sadly. They'll be heartbroken if they found out, especially Spike. She's still alive, thankfully, Cadence said. The others then breathed a sigh of relief. But what about Luna? Fluttershy asked. We can't find her anywhere in the castle, Cadence replied. I fear that she must have been taken captive. The moon is still up, or if the moon is still up, then she's still alive. Poor Luna, Pinkie Pie cried. Applejack immediately wrapped her arms around the other Earth pony and rubbed her back. Don't worry, Pinkie Pie. We'll get her back. Luna's a tough mare, after all. She can hold out much longer than us. Maybe we can use the elements of harmony to help us, Rarity asked. Well, I said it, but whatever. She asked it, I said it. I'm afraid that won't be happening anytime soon, Cadence sighed. Other than the fact that the element of magic is no longer with us. Then why? Rainbow Dash asked. Instead of answering verbally, Cadence turned her head over to the shattered remains of the elements, littering the floor like a shattered rainbow. Oh no! Sorry, nose itch, Fluttershy cried, slapping both her hooves over her muzzle from the sheer shock of it all. That bastard destroyed them, Applejack roared. It's hopeless now, Pinkie Pie wailed. We'll never be able to defeat Sombra. Don't say that, Pinkie, Rainbow snapped sternly. We're going to stop that son of a bitch if it's the last thing we do. Pinkie Pie merely whimpered in denial and shook her head, muttering hopeless over and over to herself. You mustn't give up, Cadence said sternly. There's still a light at the end of the tunnel. Celestia still lives, and we've recently received an ally who's going to join us in our quest to defeat Sombra. Sorry. The ponies looked at one another in confusion before looking back up at the princess. Who? Trixie asked, just when the double doors suddenly swung open and a charismatic-looking dragon Equus walked in, while whistling a little tune to himself. Hey, Candy. The doctor managed to reattach Tia's wings, although they're still working on her hull. Discord came to a dead stop when he spotted the remaining main 6 ponies. The mares, except Trixie and Cadence, gasped. You! Rainbow Dash yelled, thrusting a hoof over to him. Oh, crap, Discord said bluntly. End of chapter 28. Now, Princess Midnight Moon replied with, thanks. North Gallus 2002 replied with, hopefully, wink. Solo Gamer replied with, thankies, cat smile. Miss Moonshoes Potter replied with, yup, smile. Zelfra1234 replied with, Vegeta voice, it's over 9,000! Anyway, Anon replied with, thanks, and thank Wildheart1997 for giving me that idea. Wildheart1997 replied with, thanks, your comment was absolutely brilliant. Okay. Anyway, on to chapter 29. So, second to last chapter, for this video anyway. Before any pony had a chance to stop her, Rainbow Dash bolted over to Discord and socked him the hardest punch she's ever given, and knocked him to the ground. Stop this immediately! Cadence yelled, using her magic to pull the blue Pegasus away from the fallen dragon Equus. Discord made a loud groan and rubbed the side of his head. Jeez! I guess that's the thanks I get for saving the princess's life, he said, glaring at Rainbow Dash. Are you out of your mind, Cadence? Rainbow Dash yelled. That's Discord! Discord! Yes, I'm aware of that, Rainbow Dash, Cadence said. We can't trust him! Whether we can trust him or not is something that will be determined in the future. Somber's attack on Canterlot is a clear declaration of war, Cadence added ominously. And it appears that the changelings have formed an alliance with him as well. The attack on both Ponyville and Canterlot isn't a simple coincidence. But how are we going to But how are we going to defeat him now that the elements of harmony are gone? Pinkie Pie asked mournfully. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, Pinkie Pie, Cadance replied sadly. And with the crystal heart having been destroyed, I'm afraid there is no way of officially stopping him. We can wound him all we want, but killing him is going to be a rather challenging task. Excuse me. But there must be a way, Rarity said, even without having to use the elements or the crystal heart. Actually, Discord chimed in, there is a way. The mares looked over to the Dragon Equus with confused expressions. How so? Rainbow Dash asked, her eyes fixed on him to make sure he isn't lying or trying to pull something off. What if I told you there weren't 6 elements of harmony in the beginning, but 12? If this is another one of your tricks, Discord, I'm gonna kick your ass, Applejack snapped. I'm not, Discord replied in a serious tone, something they thought they wouldn't hear from the Dragon Equus. In the beginning, there were 12 elements of harmony. The elements of honesty, kindness, laughter, generosity, loyalty, and magic are the ones Luna and Celestia used to wield while they hid the 6 other elements by scattering them all over Equestria. Said elements are trust, sincerity, patience, love, sanity, and leadership. But why didn't they keep all 12? Pinkie Pie asked, even though she didn't believe him entirely. It was too much power for the both of them to handle, Discord replied, so they kept the ones they saw necessary and scattered the other 6 to different locations in Equestria, but said locations are a mystery. Silence filled the throne room once Discord was finished. The 6 mares plus Cadance looked up at the Dragon Equus with blank expressions before they suddenly burst into hard fits of laughter, all but Fluttershy. Sorry, I had something stuck in my throat. Wow, Discord, that was actually a good story, Applejack said as she wiped a tear away. You almost had me going there, Rarity added. 12 elements of harmony, Pinkie Pie laughed. That's just unbelievable. Even Cadance couldn't help but laugh softly, finding it rather hard to believe. My aunts never said anything about 12 elements of harmony, she said. They always told me that there could only be 6. Or were only 6, I'm sorry. Discord's eyes narrowed as he stomped his lizard foot to the ground in frustration. I'm not even joking this time. What I'm saying is the truth. I may have pulled off a lot of pranks and told many lies in my time, but this one is for real. To his dismay, the ponies only laughed harder. Fluttershy, however, only continued to look up at him. What happened next would forever change his life. Well, like in the beginning, she did say she was a shipper of Fluttercord. The yellow Pegasus walked up to him, gently grabbed his lion paw, and said, I believe you, Discord. The laughter from the other ponies came to an abrupt halt, and the throne room was filled with silence once more. Fluttershy noticed the shocked and dismayed look on her friends' faces, but she didn't care as much. Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash said, are you serious right now? Yes, Fluttershy replied bluntly, speaking as though there was nothing wrong with it. Her friends were speechless. Even Discord himself was surprised. There were no tricks, no deceit, no signs of mind control spell in use. Fluttershy was sincere and truthful. But why? Trixie asked. Because I looked in his eyes while he was talking, and I saw that he was telling the truth. If he wasn't aiming on helping us, then he wouldn't have told us about this. He could have just told Sombra or went out to find and keep them for himself, but he didn't. She has a good point, Cadance admitted. But Discord's evil. He was probably born evil, Rainbow Dash protested. Evil is never born, Rainbow Dash. Evil is created, Cadance said firmly. Rainbow Dash frowned, but didn't say anything after that. Cadance took a few steps forward to Discord and said, We'll believe you on this one, Discord, But if this is another one of your tricks, it's not, Princess. You have my word, Discord says. Cadence gave him a suspicious look. If you say so then, she said before looking back at the others. Which reminds me, you're all probably wondering why I had you come to Canterlot today, or tonight. I can fix that, Discord said before he snapped his fingers. In the blink of an eye, the moon went down and was replaced by the sun. Hey, it's daylight now, Pinkie Pie squealed happily as she ran over to one of the windows and stared at the blue sky happily. The others quickly joined her, and together they basked in the warm light. It must be noon by now, Applejack commented. If night lasted until noon, then that means Luna must really be alive, Fluttershy said happily, feeling her heart swell with hope. Wow, for once you actually put your magic into good use, Discord, other than heal my aunt, Cadence said. All in a day's work, Discord said proudly. Tia wasn't the only one who had the ability to raise both the sun and moon. So I see, Cadence said with a small smile. There was a moment of silence before Cadence looked up at the Dragon Equus. Were you really serious about the six other elements? She asked. Discord nodded. The reason why I know this is that I was there when we first found them sometime after the Great Dragonic War. Cadence suddenly looked a bit surprised. You know of the war? She asked. Discord let a scoff and placed his eagle claw on his chest. Well, of course I do. I was a mere infant when the war began. Is it true that the Dragon Equus didn't ally with either sides? My species tried to avoid getting involved as much as possible, but we were caught in the middle, unfortunately. Discord then crossed his arms. Why do you want to know all of this? Or why do you want to know this all of a sudden? Cadence opened her mouth to reply, only to snap it closed when she heard the mares returning to them. Now that we've gotten one problem out of the way, let's continue. War is looming on the horizon now. Because of the attack on Canterlot, we've lost a good portion of our stallions. Because of this, I'm going to have to draft some ponies into the Royal Guard, mares or stallions. The mares froze when they heard this. Pinkie Pie swallowed nervously as she shakily opened her mouth to speak. Are you saying that we should join the Royal Guard? She asked nervously. To her relief, and every pony else's, Cadence smiled and shook her head. No, it's too soon to draft from Ponyville and Canterlot, or anywhere for that matter. For now, we need to take time to heal, rebuild, and strategize for our retaliation attack. What would we do for the time being, then? Rainbow Dash asked. Help out any pony you can back in Ponyville. It's going to be a long road to recovery for all of us. Now you're all dismissed. The mares bowed their heads respectfully before making their way to the double doors. While watching them leave, Discord bent down to Cadence's ear and asked, Why didn't you tell them what you told me? They're not ready to know, Cadence replied simply. What if Rarity and Trixie told Celestia is true? Then we must find these dragons before Somber does. She then paused and sighed. But the funny thing is, we don't even know who these dragons are. Discord stroked his beard thoughtfully. The war happened 2,000 years ago. I can vaguely even remember it. All I know is that almost my entire species has been wiped out because of it. The Dragon Equus stiffened at the thought, his hatred towards dragons returning after 2,000 years of being locked away. Until then, let's just hope and pray he doesn't attempt another attack, Cadence said softly. And if you're telling the truth about those 6 other elements, then they better find them soon, before we all succumb to the darkness. End of chapter 29. Oh dear, this can't be good, Lucifer replied with, Yeah. Miss Moonshoes Potter replied with, Yep. Solo Gamer X replied with, Don't worry, I don't plan on killing either because I like Luna and I respect Derpy. What? What is this planning of Derpy being not killed, but... What? I don't get it. I'm horrified now. Anyway, Blargalargle replied with, no clue actually. Wildheart 1997 replied with, that might not be for a long while now. North Gallus 2002 replied with, Pinkamena will not be appearing, I'm afraid. Pinky might have her moments, but nothing crazy. Final chapter for this video. Notice. I just wanted to say one thing. I'm such an idiot. I was originally going to change some things in chapter 29 because I found it to be slightly rushed and lacking. Then I decided not to rewrite and add some stuff instead. I'm sorry. But when I went back and looked at it again, I thought, you know what? Maybe it doesn't need to be changed. Readers seem to like it. So I would like to apologize for the ones whom I PM'd, private messaged, about changing chapter 29 and wasting your time. I just can't make up my mind. And chapter 29 is apparently when she got the little cover art that I'm using for my thumbnails. Oh yeah, the art for this cover belongs to someone called Rositail on DeviantArt. I just added the other stuff in. By the way, this is a question that has been on my mind for a while now. Should Twilight have a baby? Well, if you're gonna have them going at each other like this, then you might as well. Anyway, starting chapter 30. Rarity stood looking up at the Golden Oak Library silently. Despite all that happened in Ponyville, the tree still stood, shadowing her with its large branches, while green leaves covered the crown, as always. The windows remained unkept and dusty since Spike came to live with her. She and the others often tried to avoid ever going there, not wanting to go through the painful memories of their times with Twilight. The name caused the White Unicorn to shudder with fear. The doctors did warn her that she is prone to possible night terrors or panic attacks, which is why they prescribed some medication to help with her anxiety, while Trixie had to take medication for her night terrors. Both unicorns didn't like the idea of having to take pills at least twice a day, one in the morning and again before bed. But it did help with their PTSD a bit. Post-traumatic stress disorder, if you don't know what that acronym stood for. But it didn't help Rarity forget her horrid encounter with Twilight, Sparkle, or Terror, since her apparent death. The look in her eyes was a look she never wanted to use or see in any pony ever again. If she did, she'd rather much put a rope around her neck. But she never did believe in suicide. Plus, she has her friends, family, and Spike to think about. Suicide would be the last thing to do. But she couldn't help but wonder every day as to why she would torture her like this in the first place. Like that in the first place, I'm sorry. Butchered sentence. She said everything so loudly and so fast that she couldn't quite catch what she was saying in some parts. Are you grateful for your life, Rarity? She had asked her just before she turned to cut into a gash, which was now a fresh scar once the stitches were removed. Although it was sensitive to things like cold water and such, a ragged heart-shaped scar now surrounded her cutie marks. Just another reminder of the horror she endured in the castle. Rarity always wondered what she meant when she asked that question, and when she called her a liar after she answered truthfully. She thought about it during her stay in the hospital, and she eventually came up with a reason. Maybe it's because of what she must have gone through while we were safe and sound at home trying to continue our lives. Rarity closed her eyes and allowed a tear to slide down her cheek. If only they knew. If only they knew she was alive. Looking back now, it would have been possible for her to have survived the collapse. But when they searched through the rubble, they didn't find her. But obviously Somber did. Every pony expected him to still be at the Crystal Empire when the Royal Guard arrived, but instead he was long gone, along with the civilians. It was actually very clever, but if only she and Trixie knew where exactly he was now hiding at. Clearly they were in some sort of mountain range. The Crystal Mountains, perhaps? She wasn't so sure. She hasn't been sure since their return. The weather was rather gloomy today. It was forecasted that it was going to rain later on in the day, which isn't going to be much help for the reconstruction of both Ponyville and Canterlot. It's been 5 weeks since the attack, and both locations didn't even have one building completed. Most of the buildings still stood standing, but with broken windows and doors. Other buildings were nothing but charred skeletons. The death toll was rather high, unfortunately. A good portion of ponies died, most of which were royal guards and enemy soldiers in Canterlot. By now the last of the bodies had been buried while the changelings and enemy soldiers were burned. They didn't deserve a proper burial in the public eyes. News of the attacks spread like wildfire throughout Equestria. Ponies from as far as Manhattan were coming to aid in the reconstruction of both locations. It was a huge relief, but it also made no difference. The damage has been done, and many good ponies have been killed. Rarity was just having one of those days where she couldn't find herself being able to work. Spike and Trixie had suggested that she went out and have some fresh air now that the stench of death and rotting meat was gone. Rarity took their advice and walked into the streets of Ponyville for the first time in ages. The entire town itself was still under construction. She was walking when she stopped to look up at Twilight's former home, thus explaining why she was there in the first place. Yes, it does. It wouldn't hurt just to go in and see it, she said to herself softly. Besides, she could really use some good memories by now, even though they had hurt her as well. Rarity walked up to the door and immediately felt the memories come rushing back as she gripped the doorknob. The door opened with a creak, and she pushed it forward. "Who's there?" a voice suddenly called from inside. "Eek!" Rarity cried as she jumped back in alarm. "Rarity?" Rainbow Dash suddenly poked her head out of the door and looked surprised to see her. "Ah, crap, I'm sorry about that. I didn't see you there." She held out her hoof for her to take. It's all right," Rarity replied shakily as she allowed her friend to pull her up. "But what are you doing in Twilight's place?" "Oh, just trying to find some books on war," Rainbow Dash replied. "Considering that we're going to have to be drafted in soon, I might as well learn about it. But I sorta made a mess in doing so, though." The Blue Pegasus The Blue Pegasus slowly looked over her shoulder at the mess she made, going through all the bookshelves just to find some war books. But what are you doing here?" "I just wanted to come by," Rarity replied, rubbing her right arm shyly. Rainbow Dash gave her friend a saddened look. She's changed since her release from the hospital. She wasn't the same Rarity she's known before. "Weren't you going to come in?" she then asked. "Yes, actually," she said before walking in. "My," she murmured as she gazed at the mess around her. "You certainly weren't kidding about making a mess. Twilight would have killed you if she found out you've made this mess." "Yeah," Rainbow Dash laughed softly as she rubbed the back of her neck. "By the way, do you really think Discord was telling the truth about the 12 elements thing?" "I honestly don't know," Rarity replied honestly. Well, she just said she honestly didn't know. But anyway. "I've thought about it in a few nights. But that's it. Maybe we could ask Celestia about it once she's recovered. The doctors won't allow her to have any visitors right now, but what do you think?" Rainbow Dash shrugged. "I honestly have no idea what to believe. Sorry if my nose itches. But we're all human, I guess." Discord's the spirit of chaos and disharmony, yet he healed Celestia of her internal injuries. Or that's what Cadence said to us. Speaking of Discord, did you know Fluttershy's been spending some time with him in Canterlot? Rarity added. Shut up, Rainbow Dash said in disbelief. Are you serious? Rarity bobbed her head. Yes. They're helping out the wounded there. Who would have guessed that Fluttershy had a talent for medicine? I guess all her days near the Everfree Forest is finally put to good use, Rainbow Dash added with a laugh. Rarity laughed as well before suddenly coming to an abrupt halt. What's wrong, Rainbow Dash asked, looking concerned. I just realized something, Rarity said before she slowly looked over to her friend. This is the first time we've actually laughed together as friends. Rainbow Dash blinked before realizing what she meant. You're right, she said softly. It's been so long since we've laughed like this. As friends. Rainbow Dash sniffled as she found herself on the brink of tears. Rarity, can I tell you a secret? She asked softly. Of course, Dashy, Rarity replied. I'm always here for you. Rainbow Dash smiled before she took a deep breath and exhaled through her nostrils. I had a crush on Twilight, she blurted out in clear as day. Rarity said nothing at first, taking the time to process what her friend taking the time to process what her friend had just said. She then slapped both hooves over her mouth. When I said I love you to Twilight at her service, I didn't mean it as a friend. I meant it as a mare friend. Oh, Dashy. Rarity's voice trailed off as she looked away from her friend in both shock and disbelief. She shook her head. I didn't know what to say about... I don't know what to say about that. Rainbow Dash looked away shamefully from her friend. Perhaps it was a mistake to tell her then. She thought she could trust Rarity with it. She hasn't told Star Knight yet, so she figured maybe Rarity would be a good pony to tell it to. But she was beginning to get second thoughts about the whole thing. I'm sorry, Rainbow Dash finally said. For what? Rarity asked. You have nothing to be sorry for. I will admit I was shocked to hear that from you. Out of every pony I know, I was in love with another mare. Out of every pony I know, was in love with another mare. I couldn't believe it either, Rainbow Dash admitted. But it's a thing I've had since my early teens. I was always attracted to both mares and stallions, but I never had the courage to say anything about it. Dash. Rarity gently placed a hoof on her friend's shoulder and patted it. Your secret is safe with me. Promise? Rainbow Dash asked slowly. Cross my heart and hope to fly. Rarity made a cupcake to the eye motion. Because I'm not putting in what's actually said. I'm making it a pinky promise. Rainbow Dash smiled and immediately hugged her friend. Thanks, Rarity. I knew I could count on you. I just wanted to tell some pony that I know I could trust. You can always trust me, Dash, Rarity replied as she hugged back. Both ponies soon pulled away from the hug. You know, there could be a book on the 12 elements of harmony somewhere around here, Rainbow Dash said as she walked amongst the many books scattered all over the floor. Why not look around and try to find it? Maybe we might find something that could prove Discord was telling the truth. Sounds like a plan, Rarity agreed. Sorry. Excuse me. But we're going to have to clean up afterwards, too. Rainbow Dash chuckled. Of course we will. Twilight never did like her library in a mess like this. Rarity shivered at that name. ... Somber stared down at his most trusted ponies with both pride and firmness. The first being the evil queen of the Empire herself, Twilight, sitting in the first seat to his left. the second being the changeling queen sitting in the third seat to his left. Sitting in the second seat between Twilight and Chrysalis was a very dark cornflower blue alicorn who was about the same height as Princess Celestia. A brilliant phthalo blue mane floated elegantly behind her head, with a grayish Persian blue aura surrounding it. A pair of moderate cyan eyes with cat irises dominated her dark face, while they stared at him with the utmost devotion and loyalty. One that equally matched Twilight, Amberleaf, Blackfire, and Brayburn's. Sitting to his right were Blackfire and Brayburn, his and Twilight's recently promoted captains of their Obsidian Guard. One wouldn't exactly call the two best friends, for Blackfire and Brayburn hated one another, often fighting with one another on who the king favored the most. But when it came to strategizing, the two of them made an excellent team. The reason why they haven't killed one another yet is the fact that their king would kill them as soon as he found out. Nonetheless, they forced themselves to play nice with one another. Splayed out on the table in front of them was a rather large ancient map of Equestria, looking rather worn out and wrinkled, with a few small cuts in the edges. The image of ancient Equestria looked rather faded, but it was still able to show details that weren't present in modern maps of it. Details such as locations that were never even heard of, or cities like Manhattan not even existing at the time. Twilight herself found it fascinating, since her thirst for knowledge never dies, of course. Wooden pony figures were placed on different parts of the map, most of which representing the Obsidian soldiers. A green-painted figure representing Queen Chrysalis was placed above the Crystal Empire. An amber-painted figure representing Brayburn was placed above Rainbow Falls. Last but not least, two figures, one black and the other dark blue, were placed in the Badlands. "Any questions for on your tasks?" Somber asked. When a full minute of silence passed, Somber nodded in approval. "Then you are all dismissed." As the others stood up and left the war room, Twilight remained seated, looking at the map blankly. The doors closed, leaving both the king and queen alone in the dimly lit room. Somber slid off his seat and went over to her side. He brought his muzzle up to her ear and nuzzled it lightly. "Is something troubling you?" he murmured. "Why?" Twilight whispered. "Why are you bringing Nightmare Moon with us instead of me? Why are you bringing Nightmare Moon instead of me? Am I not strong enough to come along on such an important meeting?" Somber sighed softly and placed his hoof underneath her chin before moving it gently until they were face to face. "No, it's nothing like that," he said gently as he caressed her cheek, bringing her face closer to his. "It's just that these beings are rather unique." Twilight cocked a brow in curiosity and leaned forward slightly, the tips of their muzzles now touching. "How unique?" she whispered. Somber smirked. "Very unique." He whispered back before pressing their muzzles in a light kiss. Twilight shivered slightly in the kiss before pressing her muzzle back. After a few seconds, Somber pulled away and added, "I just don't want to lose you. They don't take too kindly to strangers." Twilight sighed softly. "Oh, all right, Sombra." Excuse me. Somber sighed back before he brought his muzzle close to her ear once more. "Zu lokalhi di hes suvolan," he murmured in a silky voice. Twilight's eyes widened in surprise and shuddered at the tone. "What?" she asked, struggling to speak as she tried to process what he just said to her. Somber smirked and repeated what he said. "Zu lokalhi di hes suvolan." The way he spoke, it caused Twilight to blush slightly. "What are you saying? I've never heard a language like that in my life." Somber blinked and pulled away from her ear, looking surprised himself. "You mean Celestia's never taught you Dragonic?" he asked. "Dragonic?" she repeated. Dragonic is the language of the dragons, Somber replied. Zu'ulokahi di hez suvolan means I love you, my sweet Twilight. Oh, Twilight replied before giggling. You know, you sound... Oh, I don't even want to say this word, but I have to. You sound sexy when you speak Dragonic. You should teach me sometime. Somber chuckled. Perhaps Zu'u fent dir di shir hi los nerdojik mindin pa. He purred in her ear. It's time that I start teaching you. You are going to be needing it very soon. I'm sorry. Sorry for the crappy chapter. My muse to write has been lacking as of late. Wildheart 1997 replied with, thanks. Guest replied with, I know, right? That's why I left the question up there. North Gallus 2002 replied with, thanks and sorry about the PM I sent. I have no idea what I was thinking. And Kit Kat replied with, you'll have to read and find out, I'm afraid. But with that being done, there is still room for more chapters, obviously, because at time of recording there are 36 chapters, so there'd be enough for one more full 5-chapter video. So, with that, vinyl. Your thoughts on the chapters? Okay, please get out of my face. Thank you. And secondly, she doesn't like it when you yell at her. It's the death and blood and gore that gets to them. Also the porn. Ugh. It gets to me in my gut. But anyway. With that, that's another 5 chapters done. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Especially comment. Please comment. I need comments. I need to know what you want me to react to. Please, I need the comments. I need your comments. Give them to me. But with that, 5 chapters done. Coming up on 2 hours, 20 minutes. So, this is pikafan003 signing off. I will see you in the next one, my buffalo. Goodbye.